Hi, I'm Alex Roman, Executive Editor for Metro, and welcome back to METROspectives. Today I'm joined by Steve Bland, CEO of WeGo Public Transit in Nashville. Steve joins me to discuss the recently passed Choose How You Move ballot measure, the agency's rapid ridership growth, and much more. This is a great conversation and includes a discussion on how stakeholders were able to get a measure passed after being resoundingly defeated just 6 years ago. Thanks for joining us again. Hope you enjoy the conversation. Steve, thanks for joining me. How's it going today?
It's going well.
So I wanted to talk, first, very exciting news coming out of Nashville with this election season with the passing of a ballot measure to fund WeGo. Can we talk a little bit about that ballot measure? I guess let's just start there.
Sure. Sounds good. Yeah. Well, first of all, Alex, it's great to be with you. But first, I want to emphasize it wasn't just WeGo. It's not just a transit agency measure. We partnered
Okay.
with Governor. Yeah, I'm promoting him already. Nashville Mayor Freddie O'Connell's office, Nashville Department of Transportation and Intermodal Infrastructure, Nashville Department of Metropolitan Planning, really to put together the whole package. And largely that's defined by our state enabling legislation that lets large urban counties go to the ballot for dedicated transit funding. So this sort of is a culmination of 10 plus years of planning in Nashville for transit and transportation improvements. And I would say some of the things that differed, to your point, in 2018, we lost very soundly, 64 to 36. This one passed a little bit better than that, 65 and a half
Okay.
to 34.5%, if I'm getting my math right. And I think largely, obviously, there were a lot of lessons learned coming out of 2018. I think overall, if you talk to the voters, generally, this program was a bit more relatable.
Mhm.
Um, Improvements would be seen in shorter time. I also think in the 6 years since the 2018 referendum, they've actually seen some of the things that can be possible. We've been very hard at work, as has the city DOT, on improvements. We've opened two of our neighborhood transit centers, which are a focal point of the new Choose How You Move transportation improvement program. They've seen a lot of the types of upgrades and they've enjoyed those. And frankly, they want to see more and they want to see them faster. This time around, in 2018, it was a very rail focused program.
Okay.
About 22, 23 miles of light rail were at the corner of the project or of the program. This time around, we have some nominal improvements planned for our one commuter rail line, but this is largely a bus, pedestrian, bicycle, auto focused plan, multimodal in nature, that follows our transit system.
Gotcha.
The state enabling legislation really is for public transportation, but it does allow you to fund infrastructure that supports the connectivity to that system. So really what we did with NDOT, Metro Planning, the mayor's office, was to focus on broader mobility improvements adjacent to the transit system. And Mayor O'Connell's really four tenets of the program were sidewalk safety, signals, and service. So tons of improvements really in all of those areas. And that became the thing that folks focused on. A lot of the communications efforts really narrowed down to neighborhoods. So whether it was interactive online maps or even going down to advertising we had on our bus benches, talked about what you could see in your neighborhood, down to which sidewalk segments would be improved, which bus routes would see upgrades, which intersections would see improvements, large focus on Vision Zero. To be honest, Nashville has one of the highest rates of pedestrian fatalities in the nation. And sadly, a lot of those pedestrian fatalities are people trying to get to and from bus stops to get to our system. So a large focus on the safety enhancements.
Yeah. And so that rail plan 6 years ago, was that a light rail or was that what had to do with your commuter rail system that's already in place?
That was light rail. So that would have been
Okay.
brand new light rail, which Nashville does not currently have. This program focuses on 54 miles of what we're calling all access corridors. So those tend to be our heavy ridership bus corridors. And when we talk about all access, it goes all the way up to full blown dedicated lane, high level bus rapid transit. But that's not all 54 miles. That becomes sort of conditional to where we can design that in. It's everything from improved sidewalks, safer pedestrian crossings, utility upgrades, aesthetic upgrades in those corridors, transit operational improvements, things like queue jumps, transit signal priority, off-platform boarding, those types of activities that you've seen be very successful in other cities. So it's really an effort, and I think this is also one of the things that resonated with neighbors and voters is that it's very neighborhood contextual.
Mhm.
I think there was a sense in 2018 that in some neighborhoods you're going to force light rail down our throat, whether we want it or not.
Right.
Where this one, the sense is very much that, we want to fit it to the neighborhood context. And that might be full blown, high level, dedicated lane bus rapid transit. And other areas, it might be more of the community circulator type of a service.
Right. Geez, guys, my mind's working 1,000 miles a minute here, and I don't know where to follow up exactly yet. Um, I guess to jump in on kind of that 6 year process a little bit more, and the agency really making some good progress and changes. I know it's close to 300 bus shelters that have been replaced, and some new services being introduced. I mean, do you feel like that positive momentum played a kind of a key role in people seeing how transit can make a change and that the agency was capable of executing a plan.
I think that's absolutely true. A lot of us who are familiar with light rail around the country, it works wonderfully in a number of cities.
Mhm.
But when we would talk about that back in 2018, a lot of people in Nashville really couldn't relate to it. They didn't really understand what that meant. And at that time, and continuing today, the city is going through very rapid pace of growth, very rapid pace of change.
Mhm.
There's been some displacement in the city, some gentrification. So a lot of it from traditional neighborhoods was, some concern that would these investments displace neighbors?
Gotcha.
Would we essentially be priced out of our own neighborhoods? So in that ensuing period, some of this as a result of the pandemic. When the pandemic hit, we took the opportunity to really redeploy services to where people were using them. So we upgraded frequency in a number of our high ridership corridors, going to every 10 minutes in some of our corridors.
Mhm.
Ridership responded. We were one of the quickest cities to be back to above pre pandemic levels of ridership in the country, and that continues to grow. A focal point of the Choose How You Move initiative is the construction of 12 new neighborhood transit centers. We had the opportunity in 2022 to open our first neighborhood transit center in the Hillsborough neighborhood, kind of in the southeast suburbs of town, and then our second one just a few months ago in North Nashville. And those were projects that when we first started, a little bit after the last referendum, people weren't quite sure what to expect, but we invested a lot of time with our communities, with our neighbors. We were very open and transparent in the process. The end products, as they were built, were done with a lot of community engagement, a lot of community input. For instance, North Nashville, which we just opened a few months ago, incorporates a lot of art that commemorates public art that commemorates the history of the North Nashville neighborhood and its role in the civil rights movement. In fact, naming it after one of the civil rights leaders of Nashville, Dr. Ernest Rip Patton Jr. So people all of a sudden saw what those facilities could be, and now more of our neighborhoods want more of them. So North Nashville is a great example. That was a neighborhood that voted significantly against the transit plan in 2018,
Mhm.
and they turned out very much in favor. One of the things I think is really a telling point for the broad reach of the plan is the fact that we have 35 council districts in Nashville, plus 5 at-large council members. So we have one of the largest city councils in the country.
Yeah.
And the plan passed majority vote in all 35 districts. So whether you were hardcore in the urban center of the city or in some of the more suburban or even rural outlying parts of the county, people saw something in this plan that they could relate to and that they thought would be productive for mobility in the area.
Yeah. And with that plan kind of being 6 years ago with the plan being rejected by the voters and now um as you were putting this together, I mean, when did you feel like the agency and the stakeholders involved started to see some positive momentum and start to feel like this could be more successful or it was going to be successful?
I think even in the response to the service changes we've made, certainly the ridership changes, a good example is, as I tell folks here, a transit center by itself might be a very nice facility. The public art might be beautiful. It might be a convening place. Maybe we're successful doing joint development with private partners that
Right.
make it beneficial. But without service enhancements, improving frequency, improving connections through better crosstown service, better circulator routes, some of our micro transit activities like our WeGo Link first mile, last mile service, without that service enhancement, it's really just building. In the case of North Nashville, when we opened it over the summer, we've already seen the transit routes serving that particular center have already seen a 36% increase in ridership in just 1 year since the opening of that facility.
Wow.
Now, that's not just the facility itself. We've upgraded frequencies, we've added a new crosstown
Mhm.
connection. So we've done some things to make service more attractive. But I do think that momentum, seeing the stop improvements, you alluded to it. We've about tripled the number of sheltered bus stops over the last 7 or 8 years. Choose How You Move, the ballot initiative that just passed, will allow us to double that number again. So over a
Wow.
quarter of all of our stops will have shelter upgrades as well as other amenities, trash cans, benches, real-time digital signage, better pedestrian and accessible connections to get to those stops. So I think and the honest truth is in Nashville, with the growth happening the way it is, there may have been a certain sentiment among some people back in 2018 that, well, if we just ignore the growth, if we just ignore the congestion, if we just ignore the mobility issues, it'll go away.
They'll move
And in
out.
the six ensuing years, right, they'll stop coming. They haven't stopped coming. So
Right.
I think everyone's sort of acknowledging that doing nothing is not an option.
Yeah. And there's a few things I wanted to discuss about the success of the agency, but I guess maybe just kind of the last word on this. If you could talk about a little bit, maybe advice for other agencies looking at taking on ballot measures. We're kind of in an unknown territory federally, but these measures continue to be successful at the local level. Can you kind of just give a little kind of advice, best practices, things that you
Sure.
think worked for you?
Sure. Well, I think one of the things that a lot of people don't really think about a whole lot is make sure you understand your underlying enabling legislation, whether that is state legislation that allows you to go to the ballot or a local ordinance that allows you to go to the ballot, really understand that. So that's number one. Certainly an approach, and it's happening here in Nashville right now, but we've seen it around the country in different locations, is even if the voters say, yes, we want this, we're seeing an increasing number of legal challenges to these initiatives. So
Mhm.
making sure that you follow your enabling legislation closely. By the same token, really understanding what your community wants and needs. And that's not just transit riders, it's not just the folks who turn out to public meetings, but you have to do the homework, within your neighborhoods and within your communities to understand what messages and what improvements really resound with them. We live under no false illusion here. We're we're one of those rapidly growing southern cities that was designed and built around the automobile,
Right.
and people aren't going to instantly turn to transit. The majority of the people who live here in the foreseeable future probably won't use public transportation in any large measure. So understanding, number one, what else goes with it, those improvements to traffic signals, the improvements to pedestrian access, but also understanding who rides transit. There's a misperception in a lot of areas as to who rides it. So when folks
Right.
understand that, well, maybe I won't ride it, but my kid can ride it to school, or my mother might need our paratransit system. One of the things we'll be able to do with the funding under this measure is we'll be able to make our WeGo Access paratransit system accessible countywide 24 hours a day.
Right.
We'll be able to expand the availability of our same-day paratransit system, which for folks in our disability community have said has been life-changing for them. People have literally changed careers and started degree programs because of the availability of same-day service on paratransit. So
Wow.
understanding, what those markets are, and then engaging very broadly with the groups that can, might, or even not support your program, understanding the opposition. Back in 2018, we certainly had supporters of the program. We've traditionally here for transit and transportation had extremely strong support from the business community, the Chamber of
Mm.
Commerce, the Association of Realtors, our large corporate partners here. But in 2018, we had opposition from a lot of the community advocacy groups or some of the social justice groups who again were concerned about the increasing price of housing or potential displacement of projects or gentrification. So this time around, understanding that the projects were more relatable, we had organizations like Stand Up Nashville, which is a tremendous social justice advocate here in town. Nashvillians Organized for Action and Housing, another social justice organization, come out and endorse the program. In addition to the business community, so going as wide as you can and as deep as you can into who might support it, who might oppose it, and understanding what both sorts of groups need out of a program like this.
Right. Great. And shifting gears a little bit, I know you've had success. Well, let's start with the ridership growth. You guys have seen some growth in ridership. Can you talk a little bit about some of the keys to that growth and what you guys are continuing to do to continue to kind of see those numbers rise?
Sure. Well, one of the opportunities when the pandemic hit, like everybody else, our ridership cratered
Mhm.
almost overnight during the pandemic. But even when we bottomed out, we were still at about 40% of our pre-pandemic ridership, and those patterns were pretty predictable. Our highest ridership services continued to see high ridership. So as we redeployed to maintain social distancing, that meant pumping more service into those mainline corridors. So we've really beefed up our about a dozen highest ridership corridors.
Okay.
We've extended service hours on them, so they now run from about 4:30 in the morning to about 1:30 in the morning. And under the Choose How You Move initiative, they will move to 24-hour service ultimately with no worse than 15-minute frequencies. Quite a few of them will have 10 or 12-minute frequencies during the core. People responded to that. So we have, for instance, our Murfreesboro Pike Corridor service, which runs along a major arterial from downtown Nashville, southeast of the city, past the airport into one of the fastest growing parts of the city, is up in ridership almost 40% from pre-pandemic. It's over
Wow.
4,000 riders a day now, approaching 5,000 riders. So beefing that up. Where we had to reduce services that were low ridership, we substituted in the microtransit, our WeGo Link service,
Right.
where we use providers like Uber and other providers to get you from maybe a more suburban or less densely developed area into one of those high frequency, high service level routes. People have responded to that as we're opening the transit centers, enhancing those crosstown connections. Historically, our crosstowns have not been very high ridership because they tend to run through lower density corridors. And if you don't have the frequency on your mainline routes and you don't have the frequency on your crosstowns to really make that a convenience service, people haven't tended to use them. But when we opened the Dr. Ernest Rip Patton Jr. North Nashville Transit Center, we not only beefed up frequency on the mainline route, but also the crosstowns. And we've seen one of our crosstown routes about doubling ridership since then. So again, it's responding to those markets. It's working with our partners. We've more than tripled the number of corporations, schools, other organizations enroll in our WeGo Ride, our corporate sponsorship program. So selling rides at the wholesale level. And then the other thing we've had some success with over the last year or two is partnering with some of our sports teams to try to promote that leisure time ridership. Folks who might not otherwise ride the system. We partnered with Nashville SC, our Major League Soccer team. They essentially subsidize fares on the routes serving the soccer stadium, so we can offer free fare service on those routes on game days, as well as augmenting service on one of our suburban routes to serve the stadium. And then this year, the Tennessee Titans, for every home Titans football game, are essentially making fares free system wide. So we've seen, and those games are typically on Sunday. Sunday ridership has about doubled here since before the pandemic. And then on Titans home game days, we see about a 25% increase in Sunday ridership above those levels. And that's not just, by the way, game fans. We've seen tremendous growth in ridership to and from Titans games, but also just general ridership on Sundays. So building the partnerships, understanding the market. Our folks in our service development area and our operations area make tremendous use of real-time data to know where people are riding and when folks can respond and what connections they're making. So just making sure you adjust your service to what that market says it needs.
Yeah. So, I mean, in a way, the COVID was a little bit of, it kind of helped you out a little bit to understand where those routes were, where you needed more service.
I'm not going to say we want to go through that ever again. I think I probably speak for everyone in the world when I say that. But it did provide an opportunity. And to be honest, a lot of the flexibility that FTA offered in terms of making those service changes, essentially on the fly. We were literally changing service patterns every week in response to what we were seeing. And then once things settled down a bit, we were able to go through the full-blown planning process and engage the community to talk about those changes and the changes they wanted to keep and the things they wanted to see go back to the way they were before the pandemic.
Yeah. And let's talk a little bit about that. I'm curious, because you have mentioned, and I think it would go to show that 65+% of support for the ballot measure, you're getting support from people in the community that aren't using public transit. Can you talk a little bit about, Liam, why you think that is and how you are going out to specifics of how you're getting out to talk to the community and kind of engage them for these changes and for some of the things that might be down the road.
Sure. And one of the things I would not, I don't think can be overstated is the importance of the leadership and the knowledge and the enthusiasm of your key elected leadership. Without a doubt, Nashville's Mayor Freddie O'Connell is directly responsible for this passing this time. Mayor O'Connell, started as a transit rider. He's been a rider of our system for years and years, pretty much since he got out of college and returned to Nashville. He's been a member of our board. He's been a chair of our board. He's also, I think, for people who've seen him speak at conferences, he's something of a transit policy wonk.
Okay.
So he probably knows more about the business than you or I do, and he really speaks it. And it was a major initiative for him, both running for office, and he's only been in office a little over a year now, and this was a key initiative for him. And he was seemingly everywhere. So having that charisma, having that key elected leader, was extremely important to bring that message home. Here's how, and he was able to really clearly communicate to the folks in this city, here's how I used it. Here's why it was important to me. You may or may not be able to relate to this specific situation, but you probably know somebody who can.
Yeah.
So he was able to really personalize that message in a way that I think brought people some trust. And then if it went far enough that they would actually go to the plan documents and the website and the interactive devices that were out there for people to learn about or to go to a meeting in their neighborhood, then they could learn about more about, well, okay, this would be great for my kid to get to school, or gee, better traffic signals in the arterial that I ride every day that's so congested, would be really valuable. So I think the communications go, and this isn't, look, as an agency, we were heavily involved in this. I was involved personally. Our board members were certainly very directly involved, but this really was a community-wide effort. One of the things that happened in 2018, so coming back to our legislation, what allows us to go to the ballot, the state legislation requires that the jurisdiction's governing body, in our case, the Metropolitan Council, has to approve the transportation plan that goes to the ballot. In 2018, that was a pretty contentious debate. It was not a unanimous vote. It was a heavy vote in favor of putting it on the ballot, but many of our council members who voted to put it on the ballot said, I don't agree with it. I won't vote for it, but I think people should have a chance to vote for it.
Right.
This time, thanks to folks in the mayor's office, our organization, NDOT, Metro Planning, there was very frequent, very early engagement with our council members. So by the time the program got to our Metropolitan Council, it went through 3 consecutive readings with unanimous votes, all along. And to be honest, very little discussion, not very little discussion overall, but the discussion happened with our council members up front in formulating the program, and they didn't have to second guess it or question what was in the plan, by the time it got to them for a vote to put it on the ballot.
So I think I just have a couple more things, and I'm curious on I'm curious on kind of the short and long term plans for WeGo. What are some of the things you're looking to address immediately, and what are some of those plans for the long term? Because population growth isn't stopping. I was just there in the winter of last year, vastly bigger and busier even in the winter than it was the first time I was there, 7, 8 years ago. So, what kind of things are you looking to address in both the short and the long term?
Sure. Well, short term, we have another number of projects in the works and service initiatives in the works. So basically, we have the same challenges, hiring staff, and the same issues with supply chain stuff on ordering buses. So overall, the program calls for us to expand our service by 80%, which is really that will really put us up more closer to where we should be. We've always lagged behind in service levels, but that won't occur overnight. We look to expand service levels about 7% a year over the next 10 years or so, 10 or 11 years. So that's something we're obviously working on. We're already putting in bus orders for service expansion. I mentioned the dozen or so transit centers. We have 3 of those in active development now, everywhere from going through our federal environmental review process into design, working on joint development projects at a couple of our sites. As we look kind of longer term, and also short term, when I was talking about the all access corridors, and I mentioned our Murfreesboro Pike corridor, our highest ridership corridor with our most service rich, hits the airport, what have you, will actually be going out for soliciting of proposals over the next month or two to start that process toward a capital investment grant, looking at full-blown bus rapid transit in the Murfreesboro Pike corridor that would develop out. So that would be the first major project coming out of it. We're actually updating our strategic service plan, and one of the major focuses of that will be the regional connections. The ballot measure was specifically for Nashville and Davidson County. Nashville's a metropolitan county, so it's kind of unified city-county government. But we have about 10 counties in the Middle Tennessee region that kind of form the greater Nashville region. So working with our regional partners to enhance that connectivity. Toward that end, the Tennessee Department of Transportation is advancing choice lanes projects in 2 of the key corridors coming into Nashville. So that's essentially additional freeway capacity in some of our major interstates. By law, public transportation will have free access to those facilities, and we're actively working with TDOT now to identify things like transit center connections, park and ride opportunities, and how we're best able to serve those regional markets. We're working on a multiple hub system. Our downtown, so we're very much a radial, a hub and spoke system, and our downtown transit center is very much overworked. So, working on developing two additional hubs in our downtown core, one south of Broadway, sort of on the other side of the entertainment district from where we are now, and then one on our East Bank. The East Bank of Nashville's will be developing over the next probably 20 years, but where the new football stadium is going is targeted for a tremendous volume of mixed use development. And a new transit center is part of those plans, as is a bus rapid transit corridor running on a north-south axis, that links up the East Bank. So those are just a few of the projects. There's probably about 50 more that
Yeah.
I'm sure when our folks see this coverage and see what you write in Metro, they'll say, "Why didn't you talk about this? Why didn't you
Right.
talk about that?" And then the other piece coming down to that retail level and what people can relate to. When people ask me, can you say in one word the difference between the 2018 program and this program and why it was successful? I think it's relatable.
Right.
People around our system, whether it's our riders, people in neighborhoods, can relate to what's happening. And some of that is just those individual stop improvements that where people would say, 3 years ago, I was standing in the rain and the sun in a ditch waiting for the bus, and now I've got a reasonable bus shelter, with digital real time information and a curb cut. If I'm in a wheelchair, I can get to that stop
Right.
more safely and more easily. And those are, we're targeted to do another about 300 at a pace of about 40 a year. So that's progress that people can see, pretty quickly.
Well, great, Steve. I appreciate the time, and there's a lot going on. I look forward to maybe checking in on you in a couple of years and seeing how all of this is going. But again, I appreciate the time and best of luck and
Appreciate the time and always enjoy reading Metro.
great. Thank you.